Well, hello there. Thanks for joining me. I am Dr. Jen, and this is My Life as a Landlord. Good for you for educating yourself in your landlording business. It can be kind of scary, and that's why you listen to podcasts, is so that you can get more educated, which is good. So good for you. So today's episode is all about the numbers. When it comes to any business, including your rental business, it comes down to the numbers. So where do you actually get these numbers? Well, research platforms all over the place create studies and surveys and create what I call source documents. These source documents really aren't up for interpretation. You can argue their methodology and things like that, and that's fine. I like words like methodology because I'm a big nerd, but that's okay. So what we use these source documents for is when you do a credibility package for either a property or for yourself, or for when I'm looking for other investors. How do I know what I'm saying is true? How do I know what's going on in these different areas or different markets, or like, for example, the Canadian dollar changing, Trump is in office in the US. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff going on. And so how do you know that? Well, source documents. Source documents all comes down to stuff that really can't be argued. Again, it can be up for interpretation, but it can't be argued. But in today's episode, you're going to hear me nerd out on one of the source documents that I like to use that comes out periodically. And these are rental reports. Today's rental report is from Canada. This is the 2024 Canadian Market Rental Report from CMHC, which is the, geez, I always mess this up. Canadian Housing Market Corporation. I think I've got that right. Yeah, CMHC. Why did I stumble on that? That was weird. Anyway, what I am doing is the study today includes the fall numbers for 2024. So all through 2024, this study that is actually attached to this episode was published right before Christmas of 2024. I'm recording this in February of 2025. And already we're seeing more updates to the CMHC stuff because all this research stuff constantly is changing. So let me just jump in here. If you're watching this on YouTube, I'm actually going to share screen of the report and go through it on the screen. So if you're listening to it, you're going to hear all my commentary and all my nerdiness. But if you're watching this, you can see me go through it page by page on the comments in the report. So either way, just I hope you consume this knowledge and you get to look at some of the summaries of this. Okay, this is a first. I've never shared screen while we were doing a podcast before. Okay, how do I do this? Okay. Share screen. Here we go. I am opening the file and here we go. Share screen. And if you like this format, please comment, like, whatever, whether you're on YouTube or Spotify or Apple Podcast or on Facebook or wherever you're commenting, let me know if you like this format. If you don't like this format, I don't have to do it like this anymore, but you guys really like when I nerd out on this stuff. So that's why we're doing here. So if you pull up, it says housing market information, rental market report, Canada and selected markets, fall of 2024. It's got a nice high rise on it. CMHC, those guys are out of Ottawa, which is pretty cool. And as I go in, you're going to see it's the Canadian overview, then regional snapshots, and then they have 19 what they call CMAs, Census Metropolitan Areas. And so these are the little pockets. And if you've listened to the podcast before, I've done this summary overview for both the US and Canada before, and they both countries do similar layouts when they're doing their research reviews, which is kind of cool. So we'll go through all this. There's also some tidbits in the very back in the appendix, which is cool that CMHC does. And then we'll go from there. And then actually at the very end, I'm going to update you on the housing market. In fact, you're seeing that. Whoops. Let's see. Here we go. Canada overview. Let's just jump into it. Okay, the Canadian overview. First of all this entire survey is just on 2-bedroom units, with a few exceptions. They do some 1-bedrooms in here and they do some studios, and you'll see that when we go through it. But for the most part, the baseline is a 2-bedroom apartment or 2-bedroom unit. I have to be careful when I say that, because when you say the word apartment, yes, it is a unit somewhere that is getting rented, but you've got purpose-built rentals. Basically, somebody builds a building for the sake of renting out the units, and they retain ownership of the building, and then they become the landlord, who then very likely either hires a property manager or they have a staff, and they're all listening to this podcast. Or you have someone who builds a building and then condominiumizes it with all the proper documentation, all the proper announcements and recordings for the CPRs. But then the individual units are sold to owners, and then those owners rent the units. And so you have these two, the buildings probably look identical, but one could be purpose-built and one could be condominium apartment. Physically, they look no different. But you can see just by the statistics here on the screen where I'm saying, if you've got in Canada, in general, purpose-built rental market, right now the vacancy rate is about 2%, and the average 2-bedroom rent across Canada is just under $1,500. $1,500 for a 2-bedroom. So roughly $750 a bedroom for purpose-built rental market. So for people that are going to build an apartment building and then rent the apartments themselves. Now, contrasting condos that are then subsequently rented by their owners, the vacancy rate is across Canada about 1%. So it's lower. Plus, average 2-bedroom rent is $2,200. So $1,100 per bedroom, roughly, sort of the bedroom calculation that we have. So it's vastly different. It's not always the case in some of these regional markets. You're going to see this as we go through this. Some of them are almost identical. The purpose-built and the condominium apartment market are the same. Some of them are just completely different, totally screwball. But we'll see why here in a minute. So rental market conditions across Canada's large urban centers remain tight despite lessening market pressures. And you're going to see why here in a minute. Average vacancy rent, it went up. So more vacancies. Why? People are shifting around. So it was 1.5% vacancy in 2023, and now it's 2.2% in 2024 for purpose-built apartment rentals. And then rent growth. Rent growth meaning raising rents. Rents were 2 bedrooms raising 5.4%, which in 2023, the rent was growing 8% higher. So it's growing, but it's still less. So if this is confusing, please, please, please reference this study that I'm looking at. But anyway, we'll keep going. I'll keep nerding out for you. Rents increased. This is a key one. Rents increased 23.5% when the units turned over. When a unit turns over, typically that's the only time a landlord gets to raise the rent to match the demand. It goes up to market rent, and typically there's some kind of a improvement of some kind, even if it's fresh paint on the walls or maybe some upgraded something, fixtures, I don't know. But this is the only time when you can get caught up with market rent. So, but you're going to see rent hikes on turnover accounts. Oh, rent hikes on turnover accounts accounted for more than 40% of the overall rent increase. So you've got rent hikes on turnovers of units, but the majority of rent increases occurred. Why? Because you're giving proper notice for rent increases. Okay. Renter affordability still is a problem. You've got a slowdown in the rent growth, meaning rents are still relatively, they'll say they're going up, but they're going up less. But the increase of rental stock, this is the biggest thing, is that everything that was under construction in 2022, 2023 has now gotten occupancy, and you've now got a huge flood of apartments or condos that are getting rented. They're new, they've got amenities, and they're higher priced units, which drive up market rates. You're going to see how that affects different pockets of locations here in these CMAs across Canada. But of course, these new units are now what people are calling unaffordable for many renters, especially for those that are looking for lower priced rentals, primarily these newer units are for higher income households because they're the ones that have the income that'll qualify for it. Yikes. Okay. I want to make a notation here. If you want to know more about the housing issues and the entire balance that's going across Canada, one thing you might do, CBC TV has a great show hosted by Andrew Chang called About That. And Andrew Chang, I'm a huge Andrew Chang fan. So Andrew, if you're listening, please message me. I'd love to have you on the show. But CBC's About That with Andrew Chang, they have several episodes that are very simply put about the crunch that is happening in Canada about these new rental markets that have all these brand new units coming online that are not necessarily the right layout. They're too high. Their market rent is not as high as what the mortgage is and all the expenses. So if you would like to know more, very simple explanation for these housing markets, very well done. I'm a huge Andrew Chang About That fan. We watch a number of items, and of course right now they're doing a big piece on Trump and the tariffs with Canada that are, and Trudeau and all these different things that are happening. So please just note that. And they also include in there About That different layouts of the missing middle. And so it's not just 2-bedroom apartments that they do. They actually do quite a bit of different types of housing as well. Okay, I digress. Let's keep going. So there's a bunch of different ones. 2 bedrooms. Basically what's happening now is you've got market rents are skyrocketing across Canada in many places. And so tenants cannot afford to leave because as soon as they leave, they're going to be going into a new unit that is now at market rent for that area. And so they're only leaving unless they absolutely have to. If they have the choice to move or not, they typically will not, which means tenants are typically staying put longer. You're going to see these tenancies get longer. And quite frankly, the tenants are putting up with a lot more crap from landlords. So landlords, behave out there. Understand that your tenants are in the money crunch as well, but also know that your buildings are aging. There's lots of things in play here. So let's keep going because I'm still in the Canadian summary. I haven't even gotten to the regional stuff yet. In this survey, one thing, I'm going to scroll down to where am I? Page 5. This is really neat how they've done this year. I didn't remember this last year, but behind each census metropolitan area, and this is in table 1, they've got Canada, overall change in average rent. This is of course for 2 bedrooms, turnover rate, turnover average rent change when it turns over. And that's how they got the 23.5% increase in rent. And then turnover percentage point contribution overall change in rent, which 2.2%, which, you know, if for everybody out there, if you're rent increase limited like you are in British Columbia, you've got a limit. And so across Canada, the average rent increase is 2.2%. But in this table, they've got other CMAs. So you've got Vancouver, Edmonton, Calgary, Toronto, Ottawa, Montreal, Halifax. But what's really interesting for those that have been around research of any kind, the methodology aspect, they've thrown this in and they have a little asterisk down here. It says the following letter codes are used to indicate the reliability of the estimates. So beside each figure, these are all percents except for the last one. These are all percents. They have this little percentage parentheses with an A, B, C, or D in the percentage or right next to the percentage. And that's the reliability of the estimates that they're giving, which I thought, you know, that's actually really good because if it's a strong, confident, you know, number, and it's like, you know what, we really have done our due diligence on this. We're really confident. So I'm going to give that an A, which means the reliability of that estimate is an excellent reliability. It's like a reliability factor. But if it's a D, it's as poor. And even right here, CMHC says use with caution. I think that's interesting because they've not done that before. And if they did, I didn't notice, but still pretty interesting. But this is the sort of the curveball that everybody's looking at, especially as we go into 2025 and beyond. Rental demand stays strong, but signs of weaknesses emerged. And the main thing is there has been now an introduction of a cap on international student intake and adjustments to the provincial distributions that they're getting that has caused a shift in international students in late 2024 that is in this study. As a result, fewer foreign students were admitted to school. And according to CMHC, local market intelligence suggested that Ontario and British Columbia, the two provinces most impacted by these measures, landlords in areas near post-secondary institutions found it harder to fill vacant units this fall. And so the other thing is the labor market. We're all talking about immigration, and of course, Trump with his wall and in all of these things, people are talking a lot about the foreign worker program. This is another aspect that Andrew Chang goes over in his About That show on CBC. They're talking a lot about employment conditions softening across most markets, and as well as younger renters, or younger renters, younger workers. So we're not just talking about foreign workers, we're talking about younger workers as well. And typically they are lower wage earners. And so they cannot afford these big, expensive new buildings that are just coming online. So pretty interesting results out of this. So it says, this again on page 5, according to the latest census, CMHC calculates that between 40 and 50 households in major census metropolitan areas within the age group of 20 to 24 were renters. So half of the folks in 20 to 44-year-old group are renting. They're not owning. Interesting, right? Okay, here we go. Let's keep going. Vacancy rates are in higher priced CMAs like Toronto and Vancouver remain low due to limited home ownership options for first-time home buyers. Again, we just talked about it, that the folks in the 25 to 44-year-old range are having problems with the down payment, the loan, the calculations with income, and interest rates. It's keeping first-time home buyers out of the market. And let's face it, when you're in survival mode and eggs are $10 a dozen, which is in some areas because of the avian flu, the cost of food has skyrocketed. People are not able to save money necessarily. They're living off these nest eggs, which is a bad thing because when it goes time to buy something, they may not have the down payment. So that's an interesting one. I also want to draw your attention that Calgary and Edmonton saw the largest increases in rental completions, resulting in the highest vacancy rates in the major census metropolitan areas. And so a lot of these buildings for these units, whether they were purpose-built apartments or they were condos, came online in the second half of 2024. And so as a result, it flooded the market and it pushed down rental rates in some areas. You're going to see where some of this was kind of weird. And so they make a note, CMHC notes, the slower absorption of the new units further contributed to the increase in vacancy rates. Also, something weird happened in Montreal. You'll see table 2 in the bottom of page 6. Montreal was the only one that kind of stuck up here, which is really interesting comparing 2023 to 2024. Montreal's rental apartment completions remained among highest on record, and but there was huge rental demand still in Montreal. So there's a bunch of different ones in these different CMAs. Now, of course, these are not all the CMAs because they only have 7 CMAs here, but there's like 19 in the study, and you'll see that here in a minute. Okay, let's move on. I'm moving on to page 7. And Toronto. Toronto talks about condominium apartment completions reach new high. However, this goes right into what Andrew Chang on About This talks about, and they'd say when all these condo buildings completed, the value of these individual units was really high, super high, but the market rent for that unit does not track with the value. So let's say that you know what, I'm not even going to go into an example. Watch About That. He goes into a bunch of examples, but the rents do not support the value of that new unit. So you've got a bit of a gap there, and it results in a negative cash flow for the owner. The rent amount, the rent revenue is not enough to cover the mortgage, the insurance, the condo fees, the strato fees, and then any other expenses like utilities on this. Also, there was a note about small floor plans in these new condo buildings that are less desirable. If you've seen any of these, some of them have a loft bed. not everybody wants to climb up a ladder or down a ladder to go to the bathroom at night. And so some of these layouts are not necessarily desirable, especially if you've got, let's say, a family of 4 and this condo is a 1-bedroom condo with a loft bed. These are not necessarily desirable locations. And what ends up happening is now these condo owners that have closed, if they can close, but these condo owners that have closed are finding it hard to sell the condo for that value that it's supposed to be worth, and they're finding it hard to rent. So you're kind of in between a rock and a hard place. That's happening right now in Toronto, and there's other places it's happening as well in pockets. Okay, Vancouver. Vancouver, on the other side, rental share increased more modestly due to a higher proportion of homeowners in apartments. Homeowners in apartments. So you've got lower investors in there. People are actually have pride of ownership. They want to be in these markets. And let's face it, downtown Vancouver is really flipping cool. Okay, let's see. Affordability conditions yet to improve. There's all kinds of different definitions in here because of the filtering effect. And so if this is kind of neat, if you hover over the electronic version of this, it pops up on what these terms mean, which is kind of cool. Oh, this is another thing they talk about. We're still in the Canadian summary. We're talking about rent and mortgage payments are starting to go in arrears. That's not good. So you've got rent in arrears that people are renting that they are not finding the rents affordable. They are finding that their cost of living is so high that they're not able to pay their rent. So they're falling into arrears, which then becomes a potential eviction situation. But you've also got mortgages going into arrears, whether they don't have enough rent to cover the mortgage, or maybe the unit is sitting empty. But if the owner does not have the cash flow to make that unit actually solvent just to keep it going, then that's a problem. And even if you're a landlord that it's a negative cash flow, or maybe you've got a tenant in there that can't pay or won't pay, now you've got some awkward conversations going on between owners and lenders that they might be asking for a reprieve for maybe 90 days, or trying to work with the lenders about this. And so now it's sort of, you see this cascading effect where the affordability is going to force something to happen. I'm not really sure what's going to happen, but this is why we have these studies. All right, let's go into regional looks here, regional snapshots. So Vancouver, purpose-built rental market. Oh, let me scroll down the thing. Purpose-built rental market, vacancy rate in purpose-built rental markets, average 2-bedroom rent in Vancouver is $2,300, and condominium apartment market is a little bit more than that. It's 2,800, and the vacancy rate is right around 1%. I mean, immigration is a problem here because you've got UBC, you've got Simon Fraser. I mean, there's a bunch of stuff that's happening in Vancouver that's bringing lots and lots of international folks to Vancouver, driving the demand up. But what's happening is projects are finishing. You've got this massive build in Surrey. If you have not been out to Surrey recently, it's going to be the most amazing downtown core. We've got family that lives in Surrey, and every time we go by, I go, when can we go here? It's not open yet, but holy cow, the SkyTrain's there. I mean, there's just so many things going on in Surrey, but it's not finished yet. And so you've got changing migration patterns. You've got more buildings that are purpose-built and condos that are coming on the market. There is immigration is going down. It's, according to CMHC, immigration is going down, and higher youth unemployment are also affecting the change here. Youth unemployment, that's interesting. Okay, let's keep going. I mentioned actually on page 9, they're talking about Surrey. Areas like North Vancouver, Surrey, and Tri-City area saw relatively more units added to their rental stock. And these areas are attractive for developers because they're likely to have cheaper land for new development compared to the city of Vancouver. However, you've got bigger interest in, look at this, the stock of 3-bedroom or greater units expanded significantly, which was a continuing trend that started in 2020. This signals continued interest in larger rental units. Most of this was outside of the city of Vancouver, where such rentals are more affordable. And so think about who's living in a 3-bedroom or bigger unit. You've got multiple generations, you've got kids, parents, grandparents, aunties, uncles, you've got everybody in there. Very interesting, but you're talking now about a break away from CMHC just analyzing the 2-bedroom units here. This is where they start talking about the variation of the layouts. This is different because up to now, it seems that developers have been just doing these cookie cutter micro apartments, and they're getting smaller and more compact and more creative, but that doesn't necessarily answer the demand, right? So let's keep going. Okay, we're still in Vancouver here, and if you go to figure 1, this is on page 10. I just want to make a note here. You've got this figure is a little confusing because it talks about bachelor suites, 1-bedroom units, 2-bedroom units, and it's a premium above the average for Vancouver, premium above North Vancouver, and then premium above Surrey. And so it's talking about these different locations and then again, different layouts. A little confusing, but the premiums are higher and better. Overall turnover, let's see, overall turnover rate increased in 2024 after years of decline. So what's ended up happening is you've got newer buildings where tenants did not see a notable gap between their rent and asking rents. People want to just, let's see, I've confused myself. Nearly all the increase in this year's turnover rate was attributable to newer buildings where tenants did not see a notable gap. Basically, they want to stay where they are. Turnover rate increased. That seems a little bit crazy to me. Okay, and then you've got, as you go through here, then of course each borough in this survey, then they show where all of these different areas are. They've got 19, and then they've got the condominium sub-area descriptions. For those of you who are interested, each of these regional areas, they've got the purpose-built rental markets they do one methodology for apartments, and then they do one methodology for the condos that are getting rented. All of that is in the back of the survey. It's kind of interesting because they're not the same how they get the data, right? So just so they get the raw data. So just so you're aware. Okay, and then we get into Victoria. So Victoria is really upside down. Wow, wonky. Wow. So I'm on page 14, Victoria, purpose-built rental market. Get this, vacancy rate, 2.6%, and the average 2-bedroom rent for an apartment is right around $2,000, $1,000 a bedroom, and that is up 3.6% from 2023. But condo apartments that are getting rented, vacancy rate is 0.1%, and the average 2-bedroom rent is suppressed, meaning there wasn't enough data to actually record this. So they don't know. At least that's what they're reporting. So you've got this, but why is this like this? You've got this huge imbalance of people that are building, they're renting, and there's data for the apartments, but there's not for the condos. What is in Victoria? Well, you've got government and you've got student, and then you've got a lot of tourists down there. But the students are driving the rental demand specifically in Saanich and Oak Bay areas near University of Victoria. And the vacancy rates in both zones were well below the average. Vacancy rates were well below the average, not kept up with demand historically. And the number of units under construction in Saanich roughly doubled. So think about that. The supply is going up, right? So that makes sense. The supply is going up, signaling more rental supply growth in the next 12 to 24 months. So you can kind of see where this is going in 2025 and 2026 is more rental units, but it's in Saanich, right? So it's going to be interesting, especially now that you've got this international student cap going on. How is this going to impact University of Victoria? This is going to be interesting. I've also seen some very unique, innovative ways that Victoria area and beyond are doing housing co-ops. It's typically what I've heard, a couple different things, and I haven't looked into this too much. So if you are in one of these unique places, regardless of location, please message me because I do want to talk to you about this. But it's more like a shared living situation on, say, a whole floor of an apartment building that has been made into lockout, one bedroom with a full ensuite and maybe a little bit of storage, but then a shared kitchen, a shared living room, maybe a great big dining table. And it basically feels like a great big frat dorm room kind of thing, but you have your own bedroom and bathroom space. And so I've seen this where it's a co-op area. I don't know if this has actually worked. So I'm interested to hear about this. Um, in Victoria still, page 15, high demand pushed rent growth, worsening affordability. So you've got the influx of new rental units contributed to increases in average rents, especially in Langford. Now, so rents for two-bedroom units in Victoria surpassed those of Toronto, making Victoria the most expensive market in Canada behind Vancouver. So it goes on and on. And then, of course, it's got the map of where all of your zones and your sub area for the study itself. There's Edmonton. I mean, I could go on and on, you guys. But Edmonton, what we're finding in the changes in layout demand, especially in Edmonton, and the tenants staying put for lots of reasons, because tenants know that if they leave, that they're going to have a jump in rent that is just going to make it worse for their pocketbook. And so if they have to, the turnover rates are going down. And so you're seeing longer tenancies. And keep going with Edmonton. They've got a great graph in here about rising average market rents led to a low turnover rate below historical averages. You're going to see people are not moving. They don't want to move unless they are absolutely forced to move. What's happening now is you've got a competition for units. So you've got all these units that are coming online, and so all these newer units or people that have a vacancy of any kind are having to make concessions. And so they're either giving 1 month for free, or they're doing a lower rent, or whatever it may be. Is that these landlords are desperate to get someone in, which is bad in my book, because tenant screening is all good. Hopefully you've got some good tenants that you're trying to get in and make these concessions for. But you want to make sure that as you are screening your tenants, you're looking at what market rate is, units that are coming online. There's units coming online in Paul River, BC as well, where my Canadian rentals are. But there's a couple of notes in here that I want to make aware of. In Edmonton, they say rents remain unaffordable for low-income residents. The lower rent units, which are usually older and usually smaller, and they have a lower price tag, they're usually more worn, and the demand is really, really high. They can also be in a bit of disrepair, right? So one of the notes they make here, low-income households earning less than $38,000 annually have access to about 6% of Edmonton's rental units. $38,000 annually, the household. Now think about that, you guys. You guys are smart. 2,000 hours in a work year. That means the household is collectively making $19 an hour. $19 an hour. The household is full time. That's not a lot of money. Wow. So keep that in mind, is that's the level that we're looking at. And so think about who your rentals are going to be. Your renters are going to be. So these $19 an hour, they're probably typically working at a blue collar job, fast food, stocking, cleaning, things like that. These are definitely not white collar tenants in here. But as a result, you've got, as I mentioned, there's a huge competition between tenants for the lower end ones, and then the higher end units, you've got competition. The landlords are competing, trying to get the good tenants in. And then there's an interesting note here about the purpose-built rentals over condominiums. The purpose-built rentals, why would the purpose-built rentals be more desirable? Condominium apartments remain discounted relative to purpose-built rentals of similar size as landlords tried to attract renters. Renters continued to show a preference for purpose-built rental units over condo apartments for long-term rentals. Why would renters prefer an apartment building over a condo building? Well, I thought about it, and maybe you've got some input on it too. Please let me know your comments. Maybe the amenities in an apartment building are better. Maybe the tenant mix with no owners around is better. Maybe it's just better. Who knows? I don't know. Let's keep going. So I'm going to keep going on some of this. And then we get into Calgary. You're seeing more rental construction completions in Calgary. The vacancy rate on these apartment buildings have skyrocketed in Calgary for the purpose of this study. So the vacancy rate in apartment buildings is almost 5%, whereas condos that are getting rented out is at 1%. They're roughly the same price, about $1,900 for a 2-bedroom. The average 2-bedroom rent has gone up by 9% in the last year. So there's quite a bit of vacancy going on here, but I know there are some newer buildings. There's a lot of supply that just came on line in Calgary as well. And so you'll see the surge in rental completions provided more options and ease market pressure. Yeah. But our local market CMHC reports local market intelligence suggested that the influx of the new buildings, which took longer to lease fully, drove up the vacancy rate. There you go. So it's kind of interesting how things are happening. It's taking longer to rent. Sometimes you have to make a concession, so the vacancy rate goes up, but then the layouts may not work. I mean, it seems like rentals are all over the place in general in Canada, but because of immigration, because of all the changes in the international student cap, the foreign worker program looks like it's still okay for now, but there might be some changes coming. I don't know. Let's see. Oh, modern amenities. This was a note that was interesting. I'm still in Calgary on page 23. The high costs associated with new units that are just coming online are likely deterred for new renters despite the appeal of modern amenities. So some of these new apartment buildings are really cool. They have things like dog parks, bike maintenance stations, really nice green spaces. But if a tenant is renting somewhere that doesn't have that stuff and says, is it worth an extra $300, $400, $500 to go to one of these newer places that have some of these nicer amenities? Or should I just keep walking my dog to the regular public park? That may not be enough for them to jump. And so that's what they're finding is the high costs associated with the new units doesn't necessarily outweigh the modern amenities. So the grief to dollars ratio for these tenants in Calgary doesn't seem to be working out for the most part. And you're going to see that they have figure 1 here since, and they actually have the last 60 years of how this has all gone through about vacancy rates in Calgary. And from 2015 to current, especially in 2024, you're seeing that there is a huge vacancy rate. And part of that is you've got these new apartment buildings, and so the absorption rate is taking a while to get people to go there. But sometimes they just don't want it. So let's see. Let's keep going. Saskatoon, you've got student renters in Saskatoon. Tenants are staying put. I mean, this is the same situation. The different pockets are coming on. You can see their average rent, regardless of the type, is about $1,500 for 2 bedrooms. Vacancy is still pretty low for both apartments and condos that are getting rented out. And then Regina, Winnipeg, Hamilton, these are all similar renters. Costs keep going up despite the supply going up. So you've got these apartments coming online, but people are still wanting to live there. And so the demand is quite high. I'm just sort of scrolling through. So I apologize for those of you who are watching on YouTube here, but you're seeing as we go through Winnipeg, and then I'm actually going to flip. This is Hamilton. Hamilton has a big difference. You're going to see this as I pull up Hamilton. The vacancy rates are about 2%, but the average rent for 2 bedroom for both purpose-built is way different than condos getting rented out. So you've got purpose-built rentals that are about $800 a bedroom versus a condo that's getting rented out for about $1,200. So it's $1,600 for a 2 bedroom versus $2,500 for a 2 bedroom. What the heck is going on in Hamilton? There's just a bigger demand, and it's this record high number of condominium apartments were being used as rental. And so you've got more rental supply, limited rent growth. Yeah. Very interesting how this is all working out. And so some of these results, especially like Hamilton, you've got the numbers, and then their narrative that is supporting it is quite short. But the numbers are there, like for your site documents, your source documents that you need, this is all there. Kitchener, Cambridge, Waterloo, you've got your markets in there as well. You've got, it's the same thing all over the place. Let's just keep going for Windsor. Windsor, because they have got lots of students, you've got a number of, where are we in Windsor? You've got a high demand, but also what's going to happen because of this cap rate or this cap on international students. You're also talking, this is the first time that I've seen that they brought in seniors. The subregions may appeal to seniors who wish to sell their homes and downsize to the beachside communities with amenities such as recreational facilities, parking, parks, and walking trails. Newer units most likely to be unaffordable to most renters, which I think that's the caption for all of this, is we've got all these developers who had all these big apartment buildings or condo buildings in the pipeline for so long, probably since COVID, quite frankly. As a developer, I understand that it gets through here. And so now they're all coming online and it's tending to be upside down. This is not necessarily a good thing. St. Catharines, Niagara, also reduced student demand. Tenants are unable to move due to rent increases in market rates. Sounds familiar. Let's keep going. I want to get to, so we've got London. London has got a very similar story. Toronto's got a lot of stuff going on, but it's nothing that I haven't already said. Huge gaps in between purpose-built rental market and condominium apartment. Right now in Toronto, the average 2-bedroom purpose-built rental apartment is renting for just under $2,000. And where am I? Just under $2,000. And then condominiums that are getting rented out are just under $3,000. So you've got a huge gap here. And it says faced with more competition with new purpose-built rental units, they remained vacant for longer as it took longer to find tenants. And again, they're making more concessions, which is probably why this average 2-bedroom apartment building rent went down. Even though it went up from 2023, likely the listing rent when they first got occupancy on that unit was not $2,000. It was probably $3,000, and then they had to come down a bit. And then you're seeing rental affordability challenges in the units have persisted. Folks that are arrears in rent and turnover still going down. Affordability is still an issue. Page 61 has a figure that I actually really like, where you've got vacancy rates were the lowest for units at or below the first rental quartile, purpose-built rental apartment vacancy rates. So you're going to see here that inflation is matching here. You're seeing this, where people are just getting squeezed, and it's not really fun for anybody. Ottawa, because you've got the government here, and there's other stuff going on. International migration continued to support demand. You've got people that are coming out of their home offices back to work. And so you've got more people working. So they're moving back to the city centers so that they don't have to travel as far. And so you're seeing that. It was also likely that the increased in-office presence required by employers, including the federal government, moved people, which is an interesting way to look at it. And then you're seeing on page 67 at the very low end of rent, this is vacancy rates are highest for the units with the most expensive rents, which are often the newly built ones. This is the same story across Canada right now. And look at the affordability. The vacancy rate of the affordability is near zero. I mean, there's wait lists on, I guarantee you, if you talk to any property manager that has these these smaller, more affordable units, they probably have a wait list as long as their arm of people waiting for those units. And that's why the vacancy rates are at zero or right around zero. And again, another note in Ottawa, tenants are not moving. They are staying put. Gatineau has a similar story. They've got a bunch of people. I have to laugh because the title in Gatineau on page 72, I had to laugh when I saw this. Rental housing availability was higher in areas where supply increased. And I wrote, duh, rental housing availability was higher where supply increased. So really, so you mean where you built rental buildings, there's more units to rent? Duh. Okay, sorry. Okay, you've got, again, there's another note in here, long-time tenants, rents were lower elsewhere than in the area, and long-term tenants are not moving. Low vacancy, and they are not moving. Montreal has a big split between apartments and two-bedroom rents. The average two-bedroom apartment is renting right around $1,200, and a condo that's getting rented out is right around $1,700. Different demand, different in interest rates, again, concessions, more supply coming online. The students and the immigration is a huge question mark right now. And don't think, by the way, if you're a Canadian listener, I am also taking notes on this because the US is now, you're seeing this about immigrants and undocumented immigrants, and they're also thinking about changing the immigration policies in the US. And so I'm taking a look because Canada has already gone down this road with immigrants and with international students and such. And I'm looking at what might impact the US and the housing markets in the US as well. So this is really interesting what's going on the different sides of the border. Okay, there's still the same discussion. Tenants are stuck, scarcity of units, especially the affordable units. We've got Quebec is, I think, one of our last ones. No, Halifax last. Okay, so Quebec. One thing that they note here is population growth. Population growth is going to be a bigger and bigger deal as we progress through this, everybody. But to the next 5, 10, 20 years, population growth is probably going to be negative. Why? Because the younger generations are having less or no children. We've got the baby boomers who are aging out and passing away. And so the population you're going to see is largely getting older, and the average population is older, becoming more female. Females tend to live longer, and you're going to see this, that sometimes this is going to really impact housing demand. And I actually have a podcast episode coming up about US population growth is exactly impacting this. It's the housing demand is going to be very questionable moving forward. Okay, let's keep going on Quebec. This is an important part here. Rents below $1,000 were scarce in this area, practically non-existent. And then Halifax. Halifax has a big delta in between. Purpose-built rental market, the average two-bedroom rent, $1,700 when compared to a condo being rented out at $2,300. Over time, record construction helps to increase rental supply, but again, it takes time. It is not overnight, and so you have a lot more of these construction projects that have been in the works. They're starting to come online, and they're gonna come on more line. But here's the other issue that is the first time this is brought up. Ready? Here it is. The availability of construction workers and the overwhelming number of ongoing projects in the region limit the completion rate for new units. There is a difficult time getting workers, and when the workers do come, where do the workers stay? This is a problem that we have going on Maui. They're also going to have an issue, probably less of an issue in LA when they're rebuilding for the fires, is we do not have enough skill. This is happening in Canada as well. We do not have enough skill, so we have to import the skill, and then they're going to live where? It's like, which comes first, the chicken or the egg? So this is going to be a very interesting problem that is going to take some innovation to get through this. Okay, one other thing I want to note before we wrap this up. Page 88 in the study, there's two sets of definitions. So there's one here, and it's interesting because it talks about average rent of vacant units, turnovers. It talks about the methodology for the rental market survey, and this is for apartment buildings. And then coming down to the condominium apartment survey, again, it talks about the coefficient of variation, meaning how they feel about the reliability of this data, which I think is fantastic that they have this. But they also have definitions, like, for example, they define what the universe is. The universe is presented as a sum of all rental units and consists of all row projects, apartment structures with 3 or more units. Pretty cool. So make sure you're defining what a rental, what these definitions are in these different surveys. The additional resources, let's see, A1. I love it at the very back of these alternate text and data for figures. You see, there's actually even more source information in the appendix. So I'm at the very, very back of this survey, this rental market report, and it's talking about some of these, how they made these figures, which is really cool. So it's even more. So make sure, because there's some Vancouver, Edmonton, there's some more data in the very back that is not in the regional reports within the survey itself. Okay. So just to recap, rental market conditions across Canada remain tight. Lots of construction projects are completing, but that is kind of messing up whether people are going to try to sell, rent. The layouts are not exactly what people want anymore. The market rent isn't enough to sustain these new units that are coming online, and so there's higher vacancies. Affordable housing, affordable units that are smaller layouts tend to keep in high demand. I mean, there's wait lists for them all over the place. People are staying in their units for longer. They don't want to make the jump because they know that they're going to have a rent increase when they jump, if they can even jump, if there's even a unit available for them. I think that's it. There's one other thing I wanted to mention to you as we go through this, that the CMHC has now done this just came out yesterday. So today is February 7th. This came out yesterday or maybe 2 days ago. This is the 2025 Housing Market Outlook. Now, this is not a PDF. This was just an email. And so I've included the hyperlink to this CMHC note. But there's 4 highlights I'm just going to mention to them. If you want to know more, go to the write-up of this episode and click the hyperlink. So they're talking about foreign trade risks and immigration changes add significant uncertainty to the outlook. We expect economic activity to be modest in 2025, picking up in later years. Housing starts will slow in the next 3 years, mainly due to fewer condominium apartments being built, but starts will remain above their 10-year average. Rental apartment construction will remain high, but may slow in a couple years as demand eases. Ground-oriented homes, including detached, semi-detached row homes, this is the missing middle, may recover slightly, especially in more affordable options like row housing. I have other questions like how they're going to do this, but anyway, we'll keep going. 2 more highlights. We expect housing sales and prices to rebound as lower mortgage rates and changes to mortgage rules unlock pent-up demand in the short term, especially for first-time buyers, very likely. In the longer term, stronger economic fundamentals will support this rebound, and the recovery will be uneven. I think that's the word that we need to capitalize on this episode is it's uneven. Rental markets are expected to ease with higher vacancy rates, slowing rent growth. Rental affordability will improve gradually, but more noticeable changes happening later in the forecast period. Housing is just hard right now, you guys. It's just, I don't know how else to say it. It's hard. It's you've still got inflation. You've still got costs going up. As landlords trying to run businesses, how do you keep tenants happy? How do you keep tenants in units? How do you maintain these units? And then once you have a vacant unit, don't panic. You've got to still screen your tenants. You've got to manage it. But how long can you hang on with a vacant unit? These are all the questions that everybody's asking. I hope that you learned something from this episode. Please, please, please. If you're a landlord listening to this, especially if you have multifamily, when people like CMHC or maybe your provincial, territorial, or if you're in the States listening to this, when someone calls and asks you for information about your rentals, it is vital that you support that, because guess what? You contribute to documents like this that then perpetuate the source documents. So please, I encourage you, don't just not take that call. Please give them the information that they need. Yes, it's probably going to impact your taxes, but maybe it won't, right? Maybe it's just a survey. You never know. I give it no matter what, because I want to make sure that I am reporting what we're actually doing. But I encourage you, please contribute. If you've got rental units, contribute to that. I hope this was helpful. Have a wonderful, wonderful day. Let's see, I've got something for you. Here we go. Oh, yes, this is the next one. So today, setting up systems in real estate gives you freedoms in however you define it. And I'm so glad that you are equipping yourself for those freedoms. Can you tell that I just jumped to the script? Please remember to follow and leave reviews for the show. Next week, episode 116, where my guest is someone that you've heard a lot about, but you've not actually heard from directly. The other Salisbury, my husband Michael, joins us next week. I will see you there. Thanks for joining.